She died probably about, I would say now it's probably about 15 or 20 years ago.
Okay, what's her name?
Rachel Bas Chana.
Okay, Rachel Bas Chanukah. So the share should be besides all the other, besides my son and so on. It should be also in Hoschus.
Okay.
So today I'd like to give a share on Rosh Hashanah and about Yom Kippur and talk about what the essence of both are and so on, and the kind of the attitude we should have about both of the holidays. In actuality, what Rosh Hashanah is and Yom Kippur, it really was an original. It was a certain original holiday. What happened was that Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, which is a Yom Adin, was converted into a Yom Kippur. That's what happened. So Rosh Hashanah took on the nature of Yom Kippur. So the question is, how did that happen? And how do I know this happened? And the second concept, also very important, is that Shavuos, the holiday of Shavuos, which is when God gave the Torah to the Jews, was converted to Yom Kippur. And the question is, what does that mean? What does that actually mean that Rosh Hashanah was converted to Yom Kippur and Shavuos was converted to Yom Kippur?
Shavuos.
So that's a very strange concept, and today I want to speak about this concept about Rosh Hashanah and Shavuos being really converted. Both of these holidays were actually converted to a Yom Kippur. And I want to explain what that means and what it means to us. Okay, this is what the shir will be about. And the next shir that I'm going to give is going to be on Sukkot. It's going to be about Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. What is the difference between those two and the underlying concepts that have to do with those two holidays? So the first question that we're going to deal with is, what does that mean that Rosh Hashanah was converted to Yom Kippur? Well, it has to do with the Akedah. And even though I said the concept of the Akedah, when Avraham Avinu was tested by God to sacrifice his son, and he was willing to do it. And I've spoken about that before, but I do want to mention it because I want to go into the depth of what that event was and how that event is really is responsible for Rosh Hashanah being a Yom Kippur. And then I want to speak about the concept of the Egel Hazov, when the Jews worshipped the golden calf in the desert, and that converted Shavuos into also Yom Kippur. So what am I talking about when I'm saying this thing? In actuality, well, let's speak about Rosh Hashanah first. And Rosh Hashanah really is a very big problem for everyone in the world, and definitely for the Jewish people. Why? Because Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Hadin. It's a day of judgment. God created the world on Rosh Hashanah. That's when he created the whole universe and everything that we know on Rosh Hashanah and so on. He started creation on the 25th day of of Elul, and he finished it on Rosh Hashanah and so on. So just like any type of a businessman who creates a business has to assess the performance of the business to see whether or not he's going to still be involved in the business. In other words, when a businessman starts a business, he wants to see, will the business do well? Will it make a profit? Is it worthwhile keeping the business? You know what I mean? And if he sees that the business is not doing a profit, it's not going in the direction that he intended it, so what happens is he decides to give it up. And that concept is really true of Rosh Hashanah. Could be Rosh Hashanah was the day that the world was completed, and therefore God makes an assessment of whether or not the intention that he had for creating everything there is, especially in creating the human species, mankind, right? was really profitable. In other words, is he keeping what the intention of what God wanted? And of course, this applies to Adam Rishon. God created Adam Rishon. God created the soul of Adam Rishon, really, and put it into a body because he intended Adam Rishon to live eternally. Adam Rishon should have lived in Nitzchias, eternity. But God wanted to first deal with certain issues, the issue of Nam Sufa. So therefore God created the physical world, which is called Olam Hazeh, in order to give Adam Rishon the opportunity to earn Olam Haba, the future world. So therefore God wanted to give mankind the eternity, the ability to exist eternally without any issue, without any problem. So therefore, what God did was he created the man, Adam Rishon, the first man, and his wife Chava, and he gave them a test, to see whether they eat from the Eitz Hadas, Tov, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And if they do this one mitzvah, that Adam Rishon would therefore develop a relationship with God, which was the sole reason why God created him in the first place. The only reason why God created man is to have a relationship with him. He did not create man to be happy or to have a good time or anything else. To God, the most incredible ecstasy that's possible is when he has a relationship with God. And that relationship makes a man slightly less and somewhat godlike. And God's intention was to make man godlike so that he can finally earn eternity. So therefore he gave him this mitzvah of not eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that was the whole purpose of the thing. So when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, him and Chava, when they both ate from that tree, they sinned in front of God, and so on and so forth. God then allowed him to live. Adam Rishon originally was not supposed to die, and he was supposed to live. In fact, his soul was not supposed to leave his body. There was no such thing as death in the world. Nothing died. And the purpose of Adam was to convert his physical existence into an eternal existence. And this was the whole purpose of Adam. But because he sinned, Adam Rishon jeopardized his ability to coexist with God eternally. So the Midas Hadin, or the attribute of justice, demanded that because Adam Rishon separated from God by sinning, that he actually pulled the plug, so to speak, and therefore he earned annihilation, where he wouldn't exist anymore. God decided, for some reasons and so on, to exhibit the attribute of mercy and allowed Adam to live, but he would now live in a state of darkness. So God increased the state of darkness, and one of the main reasons that he instituted was death, the fact that the soul and the body are separate after a certain amount of time, and they both go to a different place. And this was created, this was invented because of the sin of Adam. Originally, he was not supposed to die. Not only that, he also issued the concept of aging, that man would get age with age. He physically would begin to exhibit symptoms of getting older. God also instituted the concept of pain. You see it? And the concept that life would be difficult. There were many things that were instituted from Adam because of the sin. He was thrown out of the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, and therefore he had to live in a life of complete hester, of complete darkness when it comes to spirituality, and therefore it was his task from now on to repent from this sin and to undo the damage that he did by sinning. 10 generations later, in 10 generations after the sin of Adam Rishon, mankind was again judged, and he was found to be wanting. He did many sins, and now it wasn't Adam Rishon who sinned, it was all of mankind who sinned. So God therefore decided to start all over. That's right. He decided to destroy mankind with a flood after 10 generations, because he saw mankind was sinning again, and to sin is to unplug yourself from the source of existence, which is God. And technically speaking, when a person sins, he should be annihilated because he's disconnected from the source of his existence. But instead, God decided to allow mankind to exist, and simply he killed everyone in that generation except for Noah and his sons and so on, and he allowed them to survive, to start over again, start anew. So Noah was, a certain sense, a second Adam. And from that time on, or actually before that time, from the sin of Adam Rishon, the first man, God gave from one mitzvah to Adam, he gave mankind now 7 mitzvahs. And the 7 mitzvahs he gave mankind are the sins that were given to Ben Noach. So therefore, man went into the second set of 10 generations. And after the second set of 10 generations, in other words, 20 generations after the sin of Adam, and 10 generations after the sin of the what? Of the first 10 generations, of the sin of the generation of the flood, God saw that mankind was still sinning, and sinning grievously. In fact, that was the generation of the Tower of Babel, where mankind wanted to rebel against God by creating a new type of idol worship that they thought could actually vanquish God, or put him in a victim's position, where he would suddenly be subservient to the power of the idol worship. In any case, what happened was God then decided to make a new nation, a nation of Israel. And he decided to make this new nation from Abraham, who worshipped God, Avram Avinu, who worshipped God, and so on. And he decided to make from him a new people, and to give them a certain guarantee. He guaranteed Abraham that unlike the 20 generations before Abraham, when mankind sinned grievously and God had to punish them, what happened was that he promised Abraham that he would give his children a guarantee. In other words, they would have a certain kedusha, where even if they sinned, they would be able to recuperate. They will be able to rehabilitate themselves, because suddenly God said, I will give them 613 commandments. Many of those commandments include the concept of korbanos, sacrifices, and so on and so forth, and many other mitzvahs that will be able to rectify when a person sins. So in essence, God created the concept of Kedushas Yisrael, that even though a Jew, a descendant of Abraham, sins, he somehow can gain a rehabilitation by performing rehabilitative mitzvahs, the laws of sacrifices, the laws of the holidays, the laws of cleanliness and uncleanliness, tumah v'tara, korbanos, and so on and so forth. And this was the inheritance of Avram, that from him would come a new nation. And in so doing, God guaranteed Abraham that his children would never lose the possibility of a future life in Nitzchias, in eternity. That almost every Jew actually would be able to rectify any sins that he did, and he would still be able to get Olam Haba. This was the promise that God made to Abraham, and he made this promise in a certain covenant that he made called the Bris Ben Absalom, where he guaranteed, like Chazal say, the sages say, Yisrael afa b'shechota, a Jew, even though he sins, a Jew descended from Avram, unlike all the other people who are descended from Adam Rishon directly, but the Jew who's descended from Avram would be able to rehabilitate himself should he sin. by the addition of another to over 600 new mitzvahs that were basically to a large degree rehabilitative. They had the capacity to rehabilitate him and so on. So finally, Avram, in order to make him worthy of such a nation, wanted to test Avram. And God tested Avram in 10 different ways. Avram in his life and so on was able to discover God, the existence of God, and God tested him in 10 ways. And the last test is called the Akedah. It's called the binding of Isaac. Because suddenly God went to Abraham and he decided to test him in the most severe form of test. What did he say to him? He said, I want you to take Isaac, your son, and I want you to put him on an altar, and I want you to sacrifice him, and so on. Suddenly, Avram Avinu was confused. What does it God mean by doing this? Because this is the whole incident of the Akedah Yitzchak, where God tests Abraham to see if he's worthy to bear a new nation. But in essence, the promise that God made to Abraham was not simply that that he would allow the Jews to rehabilitate him, and so on. It was much more serious, because what God promised Abraham is that through his son Isaac, you see it, Isaac will become the father of this new nation after Avram, after Abraham, and he will become the father. And therefore, the fact that he promised God promised Abraham that he would have a son. He promised him that mankind would survive. In other words, that God would finally create a people, the generations from Adam, the descendants from Adam, that they would survive their sins by doing certain mitzvahs that would rehabilitate himself. So therefore, the promise that God made to Abraham was simply the survival of mankind, even though he corrupts his spiritual state. And this was a tremendous thing, because all the people that existed before Abraham, you see it, did not have that promise. When they sinned and they cut themselves off from God, they actually tempted the attribute of justice to annihilate them. But instead, God had mercy on them and would allow them to survive, but their eternity would barely be able to do it. They would not in and of themselves earn eternity, because their sins canceled their eternity and they were supposed to be annihilated. You see it. So God said that to Abraham that he would allow them to survive, you see it, but they would become goyim, they would become the nations of the world, because they are descended from people who fundamentally rebelled against God for 20 generations and did not repent. So when God promised Abraham that he would create a new nation called Yisrael, that they would be guaranteed, he said, they will be guaranteed. I will never destroy them in the sense like I've destroyed the 20 generations before, or actually the second generations God did not destroy, but he was very angry at them, and he confiscated from them the concept of a future life in eternity. So for the first 20 generations, God eliminated the concept of Olam Haba, so they can no longer earn eternity on their own. Instead, they would need the Jews themselves. So therefore, they became dependent on the Jews. In other words, the Jewish people who are descended from Abraham would be guaranteed their existence in Olam Haba, even if they sin. And since they will survive, it's possible for the nations of the world of the 20 generations before to also survive. But they would need the Jewish people as a gatekeeper to the future life of eternity. And once the Jews earn that ability to create eternity, then the Goyim, or the nations of the world, would also join them also on a much lower level. But now, mankind, the species of mankind, was divided into two species. It was divided into the species called the Jew, obligated to do 630 commandments and allow himself to be rehabilitated if he sinned. And it would also be composed of Goyim, the nations of the world, who fundamentally incapacitated themselves to build a future life in Olam Haba for eternity. But God said, I will let the Goyim also go to eternity, but only if the Jews are there, only if the Jews rehabilitate themselves and recapture eternity, will I also allow the Gentiles also to capture eternity on a much lower level. But they are dependent on the Jews. So the last and final test of Avram, to be Zocha, to be worthy of such a possibility, was God suddenly wanted to conduct a test. And what God said to Avram Avinu, he said to Avram, I want you to kill Isaac. I want you to put him on an altar and sacrifice him. And Avram did not understand what that meant. You see it? Because the birth of Isaac as a son from Abraham, even though he was quite old, and so on, and he really couldn't have children. Surely him and his wife were over 90 years old. They were almost 100, and they couldn't have children. But it was miraculous that even though Sarah could not have children, that they were able to have a son, Isaac, and so on, to bring forth the Jewish people. But God suddenly turned around and said to Abraham, no, he said, I want you to kill Isaac. I want you to sacrifice him on the altar and kill him. And Abraham understood that meant that it seemed to be God recanted. He regretted or he revised his promise to Abraham that mankind would be saved through the Jews. And the Gentiles would also be saved through the Jews. So he didn't understand what God was talking about. What does that mean? God made a promise and then suddenly he revised that promise? He did not comprehend that at all. And that was the Akedah. That was the test of the Akedah. The test of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac, was not a test to see if Abraham would sacrifice his son. Why? Because at that time there was a tribe called Moloch, that they used to sacrifice their children for their idol worship. So therefore we see that mankind was able to do this. So obviously this was not the test of Avraham Avinu, but the test was that God appeared to revise and regret his promise to Abraham and suddenly decide to annihilate mankind. You see it. So what did Avram do? Well, it says, Vayashkem Avram Baboika. In the morning when Abraham was supposed to go to the Har Moriah, the Temple Mount, which is today the Temple Mount, and sacrifice Yitzchak on that mountain, it said, Vayashkem Avram Baboika. Avram got up in the morning, early in the morning, and started to go to the mountain. In other words, Avram was not even disturbed. He had a full night's sleep, even though he was about to do something horrible. He had a full night's sleep, he slept well, and that was it. So we see something about Avram which is unbelievable. That Avram Avinu had such a love for God. Not only did Avram believe in God, it was much more than a belief. But he had a tremendous love for God. And even though God asked him to do something which was literally impossible to at the same time fulfill his promise, Avram was willing to do it without asking any questions. Avram didn't understand what God was doing, but he did not ask God, what are you doing? You are contradicting yourself. You are against the promise. You are going against the promise that you made me. But Avram Avinu never asked that of God. He simply said, I don't understand it. God is above logic. Even though he's doing something which appears to be, in my mind, a contradiction, he is above logic. He is above all the concepts of cause and effect. He is beyond all the laws that govern the universe and that govern reality. I cannot ask this question, and he simply got up in the morning to go do it. And this was obviously a tremendous chus. You see it. So after he was willing to sacrifice his son, he was about to sacrifice his son, and he held up the knife, and suddenly an angel appeared to Avram Avinu and said, no, don't do it. Don't do it. God does not demand it. This was only a test. And God said to Abraham, Ki ata yodati ki yoreh lekimoto. Now I see you truly fear God, and I also see that you truly love me. You see it. Why? Because you were willing to obey my command, even though you didn't understand it, even though it was a complete contradiction to what I said before. Yet you accepted it because you knew who I was. You knew what I was, my aliyah, how high I was, that I am beyond all concept and all logic. And even though you couldn't understand it, you accepted that. And therefore I see that you have 2 years Shemayim, which was a tremendous madrega. So that's the concept of the Akedah. But I ask another question, and so on. I once asked this before, but I ask another question. Even though God wanted to test Avram Avinu, that's true. He wanted to test him to see what is the nature of Avram's belief in him. What is the nature? How much does he believe in the supremacy, in the absolute sovereignty of God? And therefore he saw that. But there was something strange about that whole test. Because if God wanted to test Avram to see his level of emunah, he didn't have to ask Avram to kill his son directly. He could have simply killed Yitzchak himself by a disease, by an earthquake or something like that. In other words, there's many ways that a person can die. And if God wants to show Avram that he's going to take Yitzchak's life, that would be a test. That would be enough. He should have killed Yitzchak through some natural means. Why does he tell Avram, Yitzchak's father, that he has to die? How could God command Avram to kill his own son? Because that's cruelty. To ask a father to kill his son is actually a level of cruelty. And God never tests someone by demanding of him to do a cruel thing. You see, never really, and so on, and so on. Well, there's certain ways, and that's how we understand it. So God could have tested Avram in the same way by killing Yitzchak himself or by threatening to kill Yitzchak. It would have been the same test. Why does God actually tell Avram himself to kill Yitzchak? And I've never seen this question asked, and I've never seen an answer to this question. But I believe that I have an answer. Because we have to understand what was happening, that God was testing Avram Avinu. What was he doing? Now you have to understand something also. Before God appointed Avram Avinu to be a patriarch, to be a father to the people, to the Jewish people, Avram Avinu was actually a Mashiach. He was the Mashiach of the 10 generations which preceded him. Just like Noach was the Mashiach of the generations of the flood and all those 10 generations. What is the concept of a Mashiach? A Mashiach is an individual who fundamentally sponsors the redemption or saving of the people. He helps to save the people when they are no longer worthy to be saved, when they sin grievously. So then the Mashiach has the ability and the capacity to perform certain acts of suffering so that he can actually turn the attribute of justice into the attribute of mercy. You see, just like Moshe Rabbeinu did and so on and so forth. So therefore, Avram was really a Mashiach. That was his original role. His role was to try and save mankind from the sins that it did before. But God said to Avram, I'm going to make a new task for you. You will no longer be the Mashiach. You will be a new founder of a new people. In other words, from you I will make a new people called the Jewish people, the Yehudim, and the Jewish people, and they will be Zocha to go to Olam Haba and take the rest of the world with them when they go to Olam Haba. That will be your task. So therefore, what was actually God doing? That's the concept of what God was doing. But what happened? Because at that time, the Satan, who was the accusing angel in the heaven, you see, who represents the attribute of justice, and the accusing angel said to God, I see that after 20 generations from Adam, mankind is still sinning. And therefore, it's about time that you annihilate them. I represent the attribute of justice, and you have to annihilate them. That's what they deserve. They cannot go on, and therefore you have to completely, abandon mankind, and maybe you can create a new Adam Rishon or whatever it is. But the people that you created from Adam Rishon, the 20 generations that come from Adam Rishon, are no longer worthy of any existence at all. They are surely not worthy of Olam Haba, and so on. So the Sultan said to God that it's now time to apply the Midas Hadin, not the Midas HaRachamim, but the Midas Hadin, the attribute of justice, and you must annihilate all of mankind. So God said, well, how should I annihilate them? So the Sultan said, well, you created them, and if you have to annihilate them, you're the only one who can annihilate souls and peoples, and therefore you have to annihilate them directly. Now, God is a father of mankind, and it's a terrible thing to tell a creator, a father, to annihilate his children. That's cruelty. But the Sultan was able to tell that to God because that's the attribute of justice. That's the attribute of justice. And when God decided that mankind no longer deserved to get Olam Haba, the natural step would be to annihilate him. But God said something to the Sultan which really he's never said before. He said, look, I grant you that through justice, through my principle of justice, mankind deserves to be annihilated. However, I want to see the possibility of saving them. How? What happens if I can find a person, a man, who I will tell him to annihilate his son? And he's willing to do that without asking me why, without even disagreeing with me, without saying that it's a contradiction. What happens if that man who's a father to his own son is willing to do it because I have told him? What shall I do with this level of emunah, this astounding level of emunah that a man would exhibit if he did this? Would you accept this father who's willing to annihilate, willing to kill his son instead of what you're asking me to do? Can this man be a surrogate person in a certain sense, and do that which you're asking God to do? So the Sultan said, yes, this would satisfy me. This would satisfy the attribute of justice. If a man could reach such a level where a father is willing to kill his son, not that his son will die, he has to accept that, but not only his son will die, but he has to kill himself, he has to kill his son himself, and completely reverse the promise that you made. And if you can find a man who has such a level of Yirah Shamayim and who has such a level of love for you, then I will accept this instead of you doing this, and therefore I will allow you, or I should say, you will be allowed, because by your own rules, I will suspend the attribute of justice, and I will be able to. You can suddenly activate the attribute of mercy, and you can save mankind. So that's what happened. So God said there is such a man. Who is that? Well, that's Avraham Avinu. That's the Mashiach of the 10 generations before him. I believe that he can do it. So God turned to Avraham and said, not only that your son will die, and that will be a reversal of my promise to you, but more than that, you have to actually kill him. You're the one that has to bring down the knife on his neck and sacrifice him on the altar. Yes, and you can't ask me why I'm doing this. I am God, and therefore I can do anything which I think, and there's a reason that I have for everything that I do. And then so when God told Avram to do it, he willingly did it. He not only willingly did it, he did it with a certain joy. It's unbelievable, the madrega of Avram Avinu. You know, I don't believe, in my opinion, there has never been a man, even of all the others, even though Yaakov is considered a greater, more powerful of, because he represents the Midas HaRachamim. But in my opinion, there has never been a greater Nisayon, a greater test has ever begun to any man who has ever existed. There are men who were willing to die for God. Yes, there are many people that want to die. But there's something about asking a father to kill his own son, which is exceptional. And Avram was willing to do this. So therefore we see what? We see that Avram was willing to serve the function of being godlike. He was willing to do the same thing that was asked of God, to do the same thing to his own son. So what God did was he said to, first of all, Avram that he shouldn't kill his son. And then Avram found there was a certain ayil, a certain male sheep. And Avram found this male sheep trapped in bushes. And he took this sheep instead, the sheep. And what he did was he took the sheep and he sacrificed the sheep instead of sacrificing his son. That's what he was allowed to do. So he had to bring a sacrifice, but it was not his son that he sacrificed, it was a sheep. And one of the horns of his son is called a shofar. The horn of an ayil is called a shofar. So what happened with that? So therefore, because Avram Avinu, and this is a very powerful thing, there's a certain problem with Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah represents the attribute of justice. Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people at that time, are in tremendous danger. Not only the Jewish people are in danger, the whole world is in danger. Because when God is a Malkeinu, on Rosh Hashanah, God is the king. And when he exercises the attribute of justice, every being in the universe is in danger. Because if he sins, then the attribute of justice says, sinning, if you sin, you disconnect from God, and therefore you are worthy of annihilation. So therefore, all of mankind sins very much. Everyone sins. The Goyim surely sin. The Jews also sin. They sin with Lashon Hara, they sin with Sinat Chinam, and they sin with regular mitzvahs. So therefore, all of mankind is really worthy of annihilation, and so on. So therefore, Rosh Hashanah is a dangerous day, because on Rosh Hashanah, the only thing that's open in heaven is the court of justice. The court which represents mercy is closed. That's right, it's closed. There is no mercy on that day. There is only justice. And justice is the worst thing that can happen to the Jewish people. So therefore, Rosh Hashanah is a very dangerous day. How could the Jewish people survive as a nation when it sins? Because it has to pass through Rosh Hashanah, which is a day of judgment. So the answer is, the deed of Avram Avinu, that he was willing to sacrifice his own son, was so great, you see it, that he cancels out justice. In other words, in his schus, in the schus that he was willing to do anything, even kill his own son, to please God, to perform the mitzvah, even that he didn't understand it, and it was against his entire nature to do, the nature of any father to kill his son, because he put down, because he quieted his own logic and his own demand to know why, and he believed in God and loved God to such an extent. Therefore, he rose above the attribute of justice. Because justice is logical. You know, there's cause and effect relationship with justice. And the logic is somebody who separates from God is annihilated. But Avram Avinu went beyond justice, because he was willing to go beyond the feelings of a just person and kill his son. Because every father loves his son. Even if his son is a Russia, he still loves him. So therefore, yet Avram Avinu gave in to the request of God, which means he accepted God completely and his absolute sovereignty. So therefore, Avram Avinu was able to go beyond justice and demand mercy. So therefore, what happens is a funny thing. Avram Avinu goes up on Rosh Hashanah when God is judging the Jews and the world, and the Satan is demanding annihilation. Avram Avinu has the ability in heaven to go into the court of justice, that's right, and say, I demand mercy. So the Satan, the angel of justice, looks at them and says, I don't understand what you're doing in my court. In my court is the court of justice, and I demand annihilation. How can you go and demand mercy? So God says to this angel of justice, he says, you know, he can. Why? Because in his life, he did something which was beyond justice. Beyond justice, he demanded mercy. So therefore, I will accede to the request of Avram Avinu. So when Avram Avinu goes into the court of justice and he demands mercy, God allows Avram Avinu to be superior and to control the whole attribute of justice. And therefore, God allows mankind, and the Jewish people especially, to survive on the Yom Hadin, on the Day of Judgment. And how do we recall the mice of the Akedah? How? By the mitzvah of shofar, because the shofar is nothing more than a horn of an idol. And Avram sacrificed the shofar instead of a son, sacrificed the idol, the ram, and instead sever the shofar. So because of that, when we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, you see it, we are actually, in a certain sense, reminding God, so to speak, that yes, it's true, according to the attribute of justice, we deserve to be annihilated. But look at who our patriarch was. He was the one that founded the nation of Israel, and he was able to do something so astounding in the Akedah Shitzuk that therefore we rely on his mercy, we rely on his deeds, so that even on Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Judgment, and even though on this day you are a king, we force you to become a father. So therefore we say, Avinu Malkeinu, you are a father first, and now you are a king. That's who you are, but you are a father first. So God, in a certain sense, is compelled, because of the deed of Avram Avinu, to become a father first, and then a king. So that's the mitzvah of the shofar. So what do we see from this? That Avram Avinu was able to convert Rosh Hashanah, which is the Day of Judgment, into what? Into a day of mercy. In other words, Rosh Hashanah becomes a Yom Kippur. It's the beginning of Yom Kippur. It's not that the first day is Rosh Hashanah, and then 8 days later there's a day called Yom Kippur. Because on Yom Kippur, the only court that's open is the court of mercy. The court of justice is closed. So we see that these two holidays are polar opposites. On Rosh Hashanah, only the attribute of justice is open. The court of justice is open, and the court of mercy is closed. And then Yom Kippur, 8 days later, the court of justice is closed, and the court of mercy is open. But what we see that because of the deed of Avram Avinu, he converted Rosh Hashanah into an aspect, into a chelek, into a portion of Yom Kippur. So there's no such thing as Rosh Hashanah anymore. Even though it started out as Rosh Hashanah, there's judgment. But it doesn't have the supremacy of din anymore. It's the supremacy of rachamim. And Avram Avinu did this. So that's what Avram really did, is with the Akedah Shitzuk. He converted the attribute of justice into the attribute of mercy. So Rosh Hashanah is simply part of Yom Kippur. So we have to realize what the power of Rosh Hashanah is. The power of Rosh Hashanah is to rehabilitate ourselves. It's not only to repent because of what we did. It's to be able to rehabilitate ourselves through mercy. And this is from Avram Avinu. So this is the first concept where Rosh Hashanah becomes a Yom Kippur. Now, the second thing I said was this. Shavuos becomes Yom Kippur. Shavuos is converted into the holiday of Yom Kippur, which means that Yom Kippur is not only an extension of Rosh Hashanah, but it's an extension of Shavuos. And this will lead to even more deeper consequences. So I want to talk about this. How does Yom Kippur become Shavuos? Now, what was Shavuos? Shavuos is Yom Matan Torah Seinu. It's the day that the God gave the Torah. What did God want to do when he gave the Torah? What kind of Torah? Well, the Torah is divided into 50 levels of Chokhmah. There are 50 steps of depth of Chokhmah. You know, Torah is normally considered 49 gates, but the Torah goes up to the 50th gate. And what is the 50th gate? When you enter the 50th gate, that is considered the Messianic light. The first 49 gates, it's considered the gates of Torah. It's considered the gates of wisdom. But the 50th gate is the gate of the Messianic light. And when you are at that level of Torah, you have the ability to bring the Messianic redemption. That's right. It's Matan Torah, first Matan Torah, which God wanted to give the Torah to the Jews, was actually supposed to be the Messianic period. Most people don't even know that. God wanted to reveal the 50th gate because Moshe Rabbeinu was revealing the 49. But the 50th gate, the Luchas Rishonis, the first 2 tablets that God wanted to reveal to the Jewish people with the 10 Commandments, contained the 10 Commandments not like we have them. We don't have the 10 Commandments on the 50th gate. We have the 10 Commandments on the 49th level. But God wanted to reveal the 10 Commandments at the beginning in the 50th gate, which is a way to understand why God is doing everything. Once you have the Messianic light, you peer into the reasons why God does everything in the physical world. You suddenly know the reasons why. And that information is contained in the 50th gate. And that was the light that God wanted to give Moshe Rabbeinu, because that was supposed to be the beginning of the Messianic period. That's right, the Messianic period. And who was the Mashiach? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was actually a Mashiach. He's the one who redeemed Klal Yisrael. You see it. And he was the one that was supposed to give the 50th gate to bring down that light, and therefore suddenly be able to not only convert Klal Yisrael to the Messianic light, but that he would do this to all the nations of the world. By revealing the 50th gate and the Messianic light, Moshe Rabbeinu would finally become the full Mashiach, and he therefore would rehabilitate and rectify the sins of all of mankind for eternity. But what happened? On that day that he went up to the mountain to bring down the 50th gate and to begin the Messianic period and to bring down the 50th gate, what were the Jewish people doing? Well, the Jewish people were worshiping a golden calf. That's what they were doing. Why? Well, basically, the people from Egypt convinced the Jews, because they all saw the illusion. There was a certain illusion that was made for them all, where they thought that Moshe Rabbeinu died on the mountain. They had a vision. All the Jews had a vision of Moshe Rabbeinu lying on a couch, on a bier, dead. So the Jews didn't know what to do. So the Erevav, the people from Egypt who went out with the Jews when they were redeemed from Egypt, they said to them, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make a new form of idol worship. Normally, idol worship is only performed by worshiping the stars and the planets. That's the essence of idol worship. It's the worship. Idol worship is nothing more than astrology become real, where everything is determined by the stars themselves. So what they wanted to do, they wanted to change the nature of idol worship and to make a new religion. And they said, what we will do, we are going to represent the Mashiach. We are going to make a representation of the Mashiach now that Moshe Rabbeinu is dead, and that's what we see when we look up to heaven, right? We are going to make the Mashiach ben Yosef, the Mashiach ben Yosef, who's the second Mashiach. We're going to make a statue, not a statue really. We will make some kind of representation of the Mashiach ben Yosef like an idol. And what we will do is we will worship that idol, because this idol, it's not simply an idol that we're creating. They did not really create an idol. What they did, we created a representation of the power of the energy of redemption, the energy of illumination, which is really the Mashiach ben Yosef. And they wanted to create a representation of the Mashiach ben Yosef in the form of a figure, a physical figure. And they chose, what did they choose to do it? They chose to make a calf, because a calf represents Yosef. When Yaakov Avinu blessed his son Joseph, he said, "B'chol shoyra hadoloi, v'kanei reim kanov," that the firstborn of an ox is hadoloi, is the beauty of the ox. The beauty of the ox lies in his firstborn, and his horns are used to redeem mankind. That was the blessing on Yosef, and the Mashiach is the Mashiach ben Yosef, descended from the power of Yosef. So they wanted to make a people, they wanted to make an idol which represents Mashiach ben Yosef, a completely different form of an idol that the nations used to worship before. And they convinced Klal Yisrael to go along with this. So when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the mountain, God said to Moshe Rabbeinu, your children are worshiping a kind of pseudo-idol. That's true, but it's still an Avodah Zorah. You see it. because they representing the power. They formed an idol, not in terms of the stars and planets. They formed an idol that represents your energy or my energy invested in you. But this is still idol worship. So when Moshe came down from the mountain, what happened? He saw that that's what they did. He was very angry, and he took the tablets, which he brought down, and he threw it at the Jewish people, and he broke them. And suddenly God destroyed all the Jews that participated in the concept of the idol. But then Moshe Rabbeinu suddenly had a conversation with God, which was horrific. Because God said, because the Jews have worshipped an idol, which represents Mashiach ben Yosef, it is still idol worship. And therefore, they are not worthy of the 50th gate. They are not worthy of the Messianic light. Because the Messianic light, the 50th gate, has never descended to earth, not even to Adam Rishon. No one has ever captured that Messianic light. And therefore, I was about to bring that Messianic light down, but I see that the Jews have worshipped a golden calf. Therefore, I will retain that life and not bring it down. So how will I keep the promise of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who I promised to them that I will redeem his people, and I will never abandon them? Well, okay, I will make a new nation from you, Moshe Rabbeinu. You will become the new patriarch of Klal Yisrael, and in that way, I'm still holding my promise. So God wanted to make Moshe Rabbeinu the new patriarch of Klal Yisrael, and fulfilling him the promise that he made to Avraham Avinu. But Moshe Rabbeinu he didn't know what to do. He realized that he was about to become a patriarch, right? And he realized that the Jewish people would be destroyed. And Moshe Rabbeinu loved God, but he loved the Jewish people as much. And he knew fundamentally that God doesn't really want that God wants to save the Jewish people, but God was in a certain sense hamstrung by the attribute of justice. But principally, Moshe had a very big problem. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu realized that God could always forgive the Jewish people. When the Jewish people worship idols, the idols of Egypt, right? What happened? God was able to forgive them. How? Because of the blood that was put on the lintel of every door. The Jews sacrificed a certain korban, a sacrifice, and they took the blood of that sacrifice and they put that blood on the door, on the side and the top of the door of their house. So when the Malach HaMavis went into Mitzrayim to kill all the firstborn, wherever it saw blood on the side of the house, on the doorway of the house, the Malach HaMavis skipped that house. So the Jewish people were able to save themselves because that sacrifice, which is called the Korban Pesach, was their repentance for worshiping Amun-Ra, who's the main god of Egypt. So therefore, God was able to forgive them. Well, God did that once, and he realized that the Jews can be worthy of forgiveness. But this was different. Why? Because he wasn't sure that he could gain forgiveness. Why? Because this was about the Messianic light itself. In other words, the Messianic light, the 50th gate, never came down to the world. And Moshe Rabbeinu realized that this Messianic light is different than the other 49 categories. The other 49 categories of Torah is the depth of Torah. But the 50th gate is the deepest part of the Torah. It's the Messianic light itself. And that has never come down to the world. And he was not convinced. He didn't know if God would be able to forgive them from that light. And what do I mean? He realized that the only way to save the Jewish people, there was only one way that he could save them. Because the Jews were no longer worthy of the Messianic light. And he could not get God to review this. I mean, obviously the Jews worshipped the golden calf and lost the source for the Messianic light. So therefore, God wanted to build from him a new nation and give that nation the Messianic light. And God was correct. So therefore, how can he save these people, these ones who worship the golden calf, even though the Messianic light never came down, only one way? He would have to create a new position where the Messianic light could go into exile. In other words, it can go into the forces of tumah, of contamination. It can be buried deeply in the 50th gate of contamination. The Shekhinah would have to go into Golus. It would have to go into exile, into the deepest level of exile. and take with it the Messianic light, which comes from the Shekhinah. So therefore, once that light can go into the exile, it's then at the same level as the Jewish people. The Jewish people are now in exile for the Messianic light, right? So therefore, if he takes the light itself and puts that in the same exile that the Jewish people are now in, the same darkness, contamination that the Jewish people are in, then they can survive, because both of them are now in the contamination, in the darkness, in the exile of the Messianic light. So he could save them. But he did not know if he could do that, because the Messianic light never went into darkness. It is the light of absolute truth. But God said something to Hanichenu, let me be so I can destroy them. And when God said that, he was actually indicating to Moshe and was saying, yes, you can still save these people who worship the golden calf. Because my level of mercy is so great that there's a dimension of mercy which can actually save them, even though the Messianic light, which is absolute truth, will go into a darkness. The Messianic light of absolute truth can live in absolute darkness. Yes, my mercy can see that happens. So once God said that to Moshe, he started to pray to God, and he said 13 attributes of mercy of God. And he said to God, I see that these 13 attributes of mercy indicate that there's a possible level of mercy where the Messianic light itself can go into darkness and exile. And this is what I'm praying for. And God said to him, okay, you got it. He said, so lachti k'dvaracha, I'm going to forgive them as you have asked me. What does that mean, you have asked me? Because you have asked me something. You have asked me for a level of mercy that I have never done before. I have never done such a thing, to take the light of absolute truth and put it in the darkness, to stay along with the Jewish people who are now in darkness. But because of your prayer, and because of my promise to Avraham, and because of his Akedah that he did, I can now do that also, and therefore I will forgive them as you have asked me. And God forgave the Jewish people on the sin of the golden calf. Of course, there were consequences to that sin. God would have to, in some way, rectify the situation. In some way, they would be punished from generation to generation. But they were able to survive. So therefore, what Moshe did was an incredible thing. He actually took the Messianic light itself, which only belongs to the Mashiach, and only belongs to Klal Yisrael when they are worthy of the redemption, to put it temporarily into an exile, into darkness, for as long as it's required. And then once the Jews would be worthy of the true redemption, he would be able to take out, not him, God will take out the Messianic light and give it to the Jewish people in a pure way. But this was only because of the prayer of Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is responsible for what's going on now. What I've been saying is that for the last 2,000 years, the actual Yemos HaMashiach, the days of redemption, has already started. We are all praying that the Mashiach should come. But the truth of the matter is that the Mashiach has already come. That's right. When did he come? He came 2,000 years ago, because Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef was an actual Mashiach. He was able to bring out, I should say, the Messianic light. He was able to do that. But what happened? What happened with Moshe Rabbeinu and the Messianic light? Moshe Rabbeinu, what Moshe Rabbeinu was able to do is to retrieve the Messianic light after it was put into a darkness. But where was it? Where is the Messianic light? Where did Moshe Rabbeinu do with the Messianic light? God told him, you can actually still bring it, but it's going to be in a dark stage. That's what you can do with it. And where is it? What did Moshe Rabbeinu do? So God told Moshe Rabbeinu to go up to the mountain again and take down a second pair of tablets of the Ten Commandments. That's right. And that second pair of tablets would be a new light. What light? It would be the Messianic light, the 50th gate, buried and exiled into the 49 gates. In other words, the first 49 gates would be a cover, would be a concealment of the 50th gate. So the 50th gate would exist inside of the 49 gates. It would be invisible. Why? Because it would not be obvious. But the second tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to the mountain and he brought down, those second pair of tablets contained the Messianic light in them. That's an incredible thing. Before that, the Messianic 50th gate was outside of the Torah. It was the top of the Torah. It was the crown of the Torah. And therefore was outside of the head. But because of the prayer of Moshe Rabbeinu that the Messianic light should be in exile, it should be in darkness. What darkness? It was in the darkness of the 49 gates. 49 gates reveal the wisdom of Torah, but only up to a certain point. But if in the 50th gate, the revelation is total. Mankind begins to understand what God is doing. So what God did is he took the 50th gate and clothed it. He concealed it in the first 49 gates. So the second pair of tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down from the mountain is nothing more than the 49 gates containing in it the 50th gate. And that's the Torah that we have today. The Torah that we have today, the 5 books of Moses that we have today, is not the first tablets which were given on Shavuos. Because those tablets were the 50th gate itself. But the 49 gates, instead, the tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down with the 50th gate was actually 49 gates which now encompass, which conceal, which hide the 50th gate inside of the 49 gates. And that's the Torah we have today. And when did Moshe Rabbeinu bring it down? Moshe Rabbeinu went up. After Shavuos, after he failed to bring down the 50th gate on Shavuos, God said to him again, now you have to go up. Right? And when did he go up? He went up on Rosh Chodesh Elul. That's when he went up. Not Shiva but Tammuz. He went up about a month later, a little more than a month later. And on Rosh Chodesh Elul, Moshe Rabbeinu went up again on the mountain of Sinai. But then when he came down, he stayed up there for 40 days. And then when he came down with the second tablets, he came down with the second tablets which contained the 50th gate, according to the promise of what God made them and the fact that God accepted his prayer. What day did Moshe Rabbeinu come down? When did God give us? When did he give us the 50th gate? In the 49. Well, the 40th day from Shivos B'Tammuz is none other than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down the second tablets, which now contain the 50 gates, the 50th gate inside of them. So what do we see? Yom Kippur is actually a Matan Torah. That's right. What you people have to understand is, what is Yom Kippur? There was no such thing as Yom Kippur before. Jews did not need Yom Kippur. If they wanted to do repentance, they would bring a korban. They would bring a korban for repentance. And that's what they would do. Or they would do the mitzvahs of the holidays and so on, which replicated the energy of those holidays which failed. They didn't have to come. There was no such thing as Yom Kippur before the Chet of the Egel. Yom Kippur was the day that Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the 50th gate, concealed in the 49. It was the second Luchos. So therefore, what Yom Kippur was created on that day, but it wasn't created as a day of so much of atonement. It was atonement for what? Yom Kippur is fundamentally the atonement that the Jewish people lost the 50th gate on Shavuos, that we lost the Messianic period. We should have had the Amos Mashiach on Shavuos. That's when it should have happened. The Jewish people were supposed to go into Israel, from the desert into Israel, right? After they got the Torah of the 50th gate, which was the Messianic light. Then they were supposed to go into the land of Israel, and they were supposed to start doing the Taryag mitzvahs and so on, in order to reinsure, in order to energize the concept of the Amos Mashiach. The Amos Mashiach should have started thousands of years ago. You see it. It was supposed to start with Moshe Rabbeinu as the Mashiach. But instead, because they failed to do that, you see it, and so on, they were about to lose it, God said, okay, I will bring down the Messianic light in a new form, in a hidden form, in a darkness. And when did he bring down the light? He brought down that 50th gate, which was supposed to come down in Shavuos and start the Messianic period on Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur was created because of the Chet of the Egel. And what is Yom Kippur? It's not a day of atonement. It's not. It's not a day of atonement. Klal Yisrael had many mitzvahs for atonement. They had korbanos, kodshim. They could do atonement for many ways, but they could not do the one atonement that was necessary. They could not atone. There was nothing in the mitzvahs of Klal Yisrael. There was no mitzvah that allowed Klal Yisrael to atone for the Chet of the Egel. Why? Because the Chet of the Egel, the Chet of the golden calf, was a Chet that was done to the Messianic light itself. But since Klal Yisrael was never worthy of the Messianic light before Shavuos, until after they left Egypt, they never had a day of atonement for the Messianic light. So therefore, Yom Kippur is nothing more than what? A kapora for the fact that they buried the Messianic light in the 49 gates that preceded it. Yom Kippur is a specific day of atonement where God is telling him, just like I forgave you for your sins, I will also forgive you for the one sin that there is no technically forgiveness, which Moshe Rabbeinu created. Because of the tefillah of Moshe Rabbeinu, he created the concept of Yom Kippur, that the Jewish people can atone for the sin of the golden calf, so that the Jewish people would be worthy of the 50th gate at the end of time. They would not lose the Messianic light. This generation that was in the Midbar would still be worthy of the Messianic light, even though it's hidden. So therefore we see a tremendous thing of Yom Kippur that no one realizes. Yom Kippur is a day of kapora, of atonement for the Messianic light. It's a day of kapora because the Jews lost the Messianic period that they were supposed to get. Instead, that was Yom Kippur. Moshe Rabbeinu, through his tefillah, created Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur, therefore, is the greatest day of atonement itself. Even though from the mitzvah of the Akedah with Avram Avinu converted Yom Rosh Hashanah into a Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is nothing more than the beginning of the 10 days of repentance. So Rosh Hashanah is a day of repentance itself. Rosh Hashanah was supposed to be a day of judgment. Instead, Rosh Hashanah is a day of rehabilitation. It's a day of repentance. Why? Because Rosh Hashanah is part of Yom Kippur. And who did that? Avram Avinu, because of the Akedah. But what Moshe Rabbeinu did is something even greater in a certain sense, not greater than Avram. But he himself did something where he created the concept of Yom Kippur as a day of atonement for the loss of the Messianic light. And that's why these two figures of Avram Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu are astounding examples of what a Mashiach is. These are the two greatest feats that the Mashiach in the history of the Jewish people has ever done. Avram Avinu was able to convert Rosh Hashanah from Yom Adin into a Yom of Rachamim and the Day of Mercy. And Moshe Rabbeinu was able to create a new day of atonement, where that atonement would be for the golden calf, for the loss of the 50th gate. That was absolutely astounding. And I want you people to realize what Rosh Hashanah is and what Yom Kippur is. It is not simply a day of atonement which God has given to Jews to do atonement. They can do atonement by being a korbanos. They can do atonement by what? By doing tshuva, by repenting. You can accomplish atonement with that. But you cannot atone for these things in the loss of the Messianic light itself. Because the Messianic light is the 50th gate. It's beyond the Torah. It's a Torah in its absolute pristine form. And that never was given to the Jewish people. But because of the tefillah of Moshe Rabbeinu, God was able to give that to the Jewish people. It was a gift. It was a bracha. Yom Kippur is a bracha that Klal Yisrael was able to atone, is able to rehabilitate, even though they lost the Messianic light. And therefore, that provided the possibility where at the end of time, if the Jews are supposed to bring the Messianic light, when? In the year 4000, God brought down the Messianic light, and he said, whatever madrega the Jews are on, even if they do all the mitzvahs, and even if they do a lot of Hashana, I will not hold back the Messianic light. in the year 4000 from Adam Rishon, the sin of Adam Rishon, I will be able to bring down the Messianic light to the planet Earth. What do you mean bring it down? It's already down. It's already contained in the second Luchos. So what does God mean I will bring it down? He will not bring it down, but he will bring it out. O-U-T, out. From where? Because the final Mashiach will be able to look into the Torah. We have the second Torah. The final Mashiach, when he wants to avail himself of the Messianic light, how will he avail himself? Does he have to go up to Mount Sinai and bring down the Messianic light? No, because Moshe Rabbeinu also already brought it down. When he broke the Luchos, the first Luchos, which contained the 50th gate of Messianic light, he broke them. In other words, the 50th gate is in a broken condition. It is. Where is it? It's in the Oren Abris. It's in the temple. It's in the Ark of the Covenant, the first Luchos, the broken Luchos. But those broken Luchos represent the Messianic light, the 50th gate, in a tumor. It represents in a darkness. So therefore we have two Luchos inside the Ark of the Covenant. We have the first Luchos, which is the Messianic light, which is hidden. In where? In the second Luchos. Both pairs of Luchos exist in the Ark of the Covenant. The broken ones and the complete ones. The broken one representing the 50th gate, which is now the condition of the Messianic light, and the full light, the full tablets, they are now complete. But that only represents the 49 conditions, the second Torah that we got. But the Messianic light is in that, is in the second tablets. So therefore we have two sets of tablets which represent two different things. The broken ones represent the 50th gate, and the completed ones, the full ones which are complete, represent the 49 gate containing the Messianic light. So in the year 4000, God said to what? He said to the Jewish people, I'm going to bring down the Messianic light. Even though the Jews have Rosh Hashanah and Sinas Chinam, even though they have this as a sin, I'm going to still bring down that light. But where will that light be? It's going to be in the second Luchos, which is really a part of the first Luchos. And who was that Mashiach? That was Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef. He represented the 50th gate, and he had the 50th gate, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu was jealous of Rabbi Akiva when he saw that in the future he will have the Messianic light. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu saw, and he was actually jealous. And he said to God, you want to give a man like this? You should give him the Torah, because this man will become the Mashiach. And God said, no, I still need you. You are the one who will exhibit the halachas Moshe Sinai. But that's another story. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva became the full Mashiach with the 50th gate. And what happened to Rabbi Akiva? He died as one of the 10 martyrs. He was the highest one of the 10 martyrs. He was an actual Mashiach who died as a Mashiach. And he knew it. He knew that he would die, that the Jewish people would never see the Messianic light. He would die. And that's why he was always saying, I always wonder, when will I be able to serve God in my death to save the Messianic light for the Jews? And when Rabbi Akiva died and so on, where did the Messianic light go from Rabbi Akiva? And the answer is to Rome, to Christianity, to Esav. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about the Messianic light being in an exile. So what happened was the Messianic light went into the exile of Rome, the exile of Esav. That's where it's today. It's still in exile, but it was brought down in the year 4000, and Rabbi Akiva was able to procure it. How? Rabbi Akiva did not have to go up the mountain from Mount Sinai. Why? Because the Messianic light came down to the earth, to the people of Israel, and was hidden. Where is it hidden? Now it's not hidden. Where? It's in the Kabbalah and so on. And I'm going to talk about these things later in the next Kabbalah Shurim. Where is the Messianic light? It's in the Torah itself, in the Kabbalah of the Torah. You see it. It's with the Goyim, but the Messianic light in a certain sense exists by Goyim. It exists about the Christians. And we will talk about that some in a future time shortly. So what do we see? How is that possible that how did Rabbi Akiva get the Messianic light? He knew how to daushen, he knew how to extricate the Messianic light, the 50th gate, from the second tablets. No one knows how to do that. No human being has ever been given that information, how to take out the Messianic light from the second tablets that were given on Yom Kippur. Because the Messianic light exists in those tablets in the second one. But he was given the ability to take out this light and reveal it to the world. That's right. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef does not have to go up the mountain to receive the Messianic light. He can reveal the 50th gate directly because he knows the techniques, how to draw it out from the 49 gates itself. So we see, therefore, the relationship of Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to bring down the 50th gate, but he failed. So what he convinced God was to take the 50th gate and to put it in broken tablets. And then suddenly he concealed it in the 49 gates in new tablets, which is the Torah that we have today. And Rabbi Akiva in the year 4000, or approximately that time, knew how to take them out of the Torah that we have and reveal it to the world. But he died instead because he put the Messianic light into a negative zone. But there's a difference. Before it was in a negative zone, buried in the 49 levels. The Messianic light was buried in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, in the 5 books of Moses. But after Rabbi Akiva, it was no longer buried. It was released from the 49 levels of things, and it was put into its own gullus. The Messianic light is into an exile, into a darkness by itself. It is no longer in the darkness of the second Torah, the second tablets that we have. It's already been released by Rabbi Akiva, who will then finally take the Messianic light out of what? Out of the 49 thing, out of the gullus of it. Now that the Messianic light, the Nun Sharei Bina, the Messianic light is now in the exile of the Goyim, of Rome, of Esav. Now that's in this exile, who's going to take it out of that captivity? Because even though the Messianic light is out of its cage, out of the 49 levels of the second tablets, it is now out of the cage and it's open. It is now in the cage of Esav, and they are using it now temporarily. And we will discuss that in the future. Who will take it out of the hands of Esav? Who will remove it then? And the answer is what? The last Mashiach, the one that we are waiting for, the one that we are waiting for to redeem the Jewish people and reveal the Messianic light as it used to exist in the 49 categories. He will know how to take it out. He will truly know how to do it. And then he will reveal it to the world. He will reveal it to Klal Yisrael. He will reveal it to all of mankind, and suddenly he will be the full-blown Mashiach that was supposed to be with Moshe Rabbeinu, and also was supposed to be with Rabbi Akiva. Both of them failed. Moshe Rabbeinu failed to take that. He succeeded in bringing down the Messianic light, but he failed to have it revealed. Rabbi Akiva allowed it to be revealed and took it out of the cage of the 49 Shorim, the 49 gates. But no one has ever taken the Messianic light itself out of the gullus of Esav, the gullus of Odom. It's still in the deepest part of the Klippa. The one who will do that is the third Mashiach, the final one, who, with God's will, should reveal to us speedily in our days. But he's the one who will finally reveal the Messianic light as a direct. He will take it out of exile. But who created the possibility of the Messianic light being in exile, of the Messianic light being in darkness? Who? Moshe Rabbeinu. He created the possibility that the Messianic light would not stay up in heaven. It would come down to the earth on broken tablets, and then it would be converted into the 2 tablets that are full, the 49 levels. And that he created the holiday of Yom Kippur. He made Shavuos into Yom Kippur. Moshe Rabbeinu did this. And the final Mashiach will reveal the Messianic light as it exists on its own. And that's where we are waiting for. And that's what I mean, that Shavuos became Yom Kippur. In other words, because Yom Kippur reveals the Messianic light in an exile, in a negative zone. The Messianic light can exist in 3 ways. 1, it can exist in heaven, where it does not come down to the earth. The 50th gate remains in heaven, and nobody has it. On the second level, the Messianic light exists. How? as broken tablets, where it exists in the first tablets that were given, but it was broken. So therefore, it's in the captivity of the 49 gates that exist before it. And finally, the Messianic light can be freed from the 49 categories, and Rabbi Akiva is the one who freed it from that, so that it can actually be out, and now it's purely in exile. It's not in the exile of the 50th gate. It's not in the exile of the 49 gates. It's in the lowest level of the Shechina, in the Shechina in Golus, but it's in the exile of Edom. And that's why the Medrash says that when Esav was buried, his head was buried in the Ma'or HaMachpelah. What does that mean? What does that mean, that the head, because when Yaakov Avinu was supposed to be buried, he was supposed to be buried where? Yaakov Avinu was supposed to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, and Yosef took him from Egypt to bury in the land of Israel. And during the burial, when they were put Yaakov in the Ma'or HaMachpelah, the cave of Machpelah, what happened was there was a big argument. Esav came and it said, no, I should be in the Ma'or HaMachpelah because I am the older brother, I'm the Bechor. He said, I should be in the cave. And suddenly, the son of Chusham, Chusham, who was the son of Asher, he was deaf. He didn't understand what was going on. He saw them delaying the burial of Yaakov, and he saw that Esav was responsible for the whole controversy. So he went to Esav and he chopped off his head. He cut his head off. And the head rolled down, and it rolled into the cave of Machpelah. And the Jews were not allowed to take that head out. The head of Esav, even though the body of Esav is outside of Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah, the head of Esav was buried together with the Ovis, Adam, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the head of Esav is in the cave of Machpelah. Why? Esav was a Rasha, and Esav was therefore forfeited his possibility of being an Av. Why does God want his head? Because that head of Esav represents the 50th gate. It is the 50th gate that is now in the permission. It is now in the domain of Esav. That's right. I'm telling you that the 50th gate has three places it is. It's either in heaven or it's in the broken luchos, and which means it's in the second tablets of 49 gates, or else it's out. It's completely out, and it's buried in the Kabbalah. It's buried in amongst the Jews, but the Jews cannot understand it because the Kabbalah is written in metaphor, and I will speak about that in the future. But the Messianic light itself is now out of the 49 categories of gates of Torah. So therefore, it's no longer in the Torah that we have in the second tablets. It's out of that in a separate discipline. And the one who revealed that is the final Mashiach. So since that, and that status is when the status of the head of Esav in the Ma'or Machpelah. The head of Esav, because the Messianic light in the third stage is in where? It's in the hands of Esav, in the head of Esav. And because it's in the head of Esav, what the head of Esav contains the Messianic light, that is the exile of the final exile of the Messianic light. And therefore, that's in the head of Esav. Esav now has that in his domain and is able to use it to a certain extent. We will talk about that later on. But because of that, the final Mashiach reveals the Messianic light by understanding it in a certain sense from Esav himself. So therefore, we see the whole sojourn. We see what happened, that the story of Rosh Hashanah, the story of Yom Kippur, is not a simple story where the Jews have to do tshuva and they are forgiven in Yom Kippur. This is not their story. If you believe that and you believe in a false thing, the real story of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is the story of the Messianic light, where the Messianic light was supposed to have been destroyed by Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu saved the Messianic light and the ultimate redemption through the Akedah Yitzchak, to the binding of Isaac, because his desire to kill his son and commit himself to the commandment of God. And Moshe Rabbeinu took that Messianic light, right, and he was able to absorb it into the 49 gates, which are now evident from the 49 Shon, the 49 gates, which exist in the second tablets. And then finally, Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef took it out of the second tablets, right? Moshe Rabbeinu therefore now was able to take the Messianic light from the broken luchos and put it into the 49 gates of the second tablets. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu created the concept of Yom Kippur, which is a mechila for the chet of the egel, for attempting to destroy the Messianic light in the redemption. He was able to save it and create a new holiday of atonement of this Messianic light. And Rabbi Kippur ben Yosef, who was a Mashiach, was able to take the Messianic light out of the 49 gates in the tablets, the second tablets which we have, which is the Chamisha Chumsha Torah, and put it out. And finally, the third Mashiach will be able to take it from there and reveal it to Klal Yisrael from the head of Esav, which is now buried in the Mount Machpelah, in Mount Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah. So therefore, we see what Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur really is. We see that these two holidays are not simple holidays. These are holidays that relate to the Messianic light, to the 50th gate, the ultimate absolute truth that will come to Klal Yisrael in the Yom Mashiach. So this is what we're waiting for. What we are waiting for is for the Messianic light, which is in the Kabbalah and hidden, because the whole Kabbalah is in mashal, it's in a metaphor. When the final Mashiach will reveal the concept of the Kabbalah and reveal the total Messianic light in its true form, suddenly, from the exile of the Messianic light. 2,000 years, the Messianic light has lived in the exile of Edom. And finally, the Messianic light will be revealed to the Jewish people, and then it will be revealed to the whole world, and so on. And what our prayer is that this should happen this year. It doesn't seem to have happened in Pei Aleph. It will happen one day, hopefully this year, when we will see the Messianic light in its true form out of heaven, out of the first tablets, out of the second tablets, and out of Yom Kippur. That there should be a new day. There should be a day that suddenly arrives that has nothing to do with Shavuos. It has nothing to do with Yom Kippur, right? These should be 2 days that exist in the past, but there should be a new day, a new Yom Tov, it should be a new day where Klal Yisrael will be able to see the Messianic light in its purest form. And when we see the finally the Messiah, Amen, Ken Yehi Ratzon.
Amen. How does the Sor Lazazel fit into this structure?
Well, that's another concept. That's a general concept of a korban. The korban Yom Kippur, we sacrifice a certain korban on Yom Kippur, so'ir, a goat, which in a certain sense represents Esav. But in order for that goat to be sacrificed in the temple, we have to sacrifice another goat, and that goat goes to the Midas Hadin. And by sacrificing another goat that we throw off the cliff, it's a sacrifice that goes to Matthias, to appease the Midas Hadin, so that the goat, which is sacrificed in the temple, becomes effective. But it's not related. It's only related to the Yom Mashiach in the sense that it represents a goat, which is the concept of Esav. We're in the Golus of Esav, and I spoke about that already one time. And I said that Esav is the Bechor, and as the Bechor of the two brothers Yaakov and Esav, it is Esav who has to heal Yaakov. And fundamentally, Esav becomes a person who heals Yaakov because he captures the Messianic light. Any other questions?
Well, actually, on that line, we spend a lot of time on Yom Kippur with focusing on all of the avoda, running around, dashing the blood, and burning the guitars. How am I supposed to think about that after this fantastic shir? What do I think about that stuff?
All I say is
reading it.
What I said in the shir, I mean, fundamentally, I don't think it's known, but it's not really known that well. But Yom Kippur is really a day of atonement that we are still zocher to the Messianic light, to the Shah, the 50th gate. Even though we don't have it, we are zocher to it. And Yom Kippur is the promise of God to Moshe Rabbeinu. When the Rebbeinu Shem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Solachti kedoracha," I will forgive them because of your prayer. And what God was saying, I will give them a day which in essence is a kapara, it's a redemption of the Jews for the actual hate of the Egel itself, because they lost their messianic light. But that's the thing. So while you're davening on Yom Kippur and you're praying on Yom Kippur, you have to consider the fact of what Yom Kippur is and so on and so forth. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to say.
When we
Wait. Excuse me. I'd like to say one more thing. And it's on. I want to say one more thing. How should we proceed to go to Yom Kippur? What is the attitude that we all have to have on Yom Kippur? Do we say that we have to be guilty, we have to repent, and we have to feel terribly guilty? In other words, should the emotion that overcomes us on Yom Kippur be one of guilt, that we sinned? Is that the fundamental emotion that we should have on Yom Kippur? No. Yom Kippur has nothing to do with guilt. I tell you, nothing to do with guilt. And most people go to Yom Kippur from a standpoint of guilt, and that is a big mistake. What does therefore Yom Kippur have to do with? So what is Yom Kippur? If it's not a question of guilt, what does that have to do with? So I'll tell you what I think. If a person comes over to his friend and he says, I just received news that there's a certain stock, that the stock now is worth $1, but that stock will go up after there's a new issue on that stock. It's become a new issue, and when it becomes a new issue on that stock, it will go from $1 to $100 suddenly overnight. And therefore, if you invest $100, right, you will have $10,000 automatically. If you invest $1,000, you will get, for every $1 of the $1,000, you will have instead you will have $100,000. That's what I'm telling you. So my advice to you is, I'll tell you the name of the stock, and you should invest in this stock, because this is going to happen. You think about it, and you say, nah, I don't believe it. That's not possible. You know, the person that I know, maybe he knows. I don't know if he knows it's going to happen. I don't believe it's going to happen. And then what do? You fail to invest the $1 in that stock. You don't take advantage of the opportunity. And then let's say a month later, it happens. Exactly what the person said to you would happened. If you would have invested $100, you would get back what? $10,000. And if you invest $1,000, you would get back $100,000. And if you would have invested $100,000, you would get back, $10,000, you would get $1 million back. And then you're thinking about what you could have gotten. Now, what is the emotion that you suddenly have when you suddenly realize the kind of loss that you will have sustained because you didn't take advantage of what this guy was saying? Do you have an emotion of guilt? Do you have an emotion? Is guilt the emotion that you have because you didn't do it? No. What do you feel like? You feel incredibly stupid. You feel terrible. Not because you did anything wrong. You feel terrible because you didn't do something right. There's a difference between feeling that you did something wrong, which is called guilt, and there's a difference between not doing something right, which is the feeling that you have when you could have taken advantage of an opportunity and you failed to take advantage of an opportunity. That's what you should be feeling Yom Kippur. Why? Because God is saying to you, I'm giving you the most incredible gift of all. By doing certain mitzvahs, you will not only earn my relationship with you, but in that relationship, you will be so ecstatic and so satisfied that you will exist forever. Nitzchias. And all I'm asking you to do is for maybe 70 years, whatever it is, to keep my mitzvahs, that through my mitzvahs, by keeping them, you will develop a relationship. And once you and I, God says to you, have that relationship where you trust me, you believe in my power, and you trust me that I will do as I say, which is called emunah, and that you trust me in terms of what I want to do good for you, that's called betochen. If you have emunah and betochen in me, you will be rewarded with eternal existence next to me. So you will be godlike. You have no idea what it's like to feel when you are godlike. And this is what I've given to you for the mitzvah that you do. And then what happens? You think it over and you say, nah, I don't believe him. I don't believe that he's going to give it to me. I don't know if he's real. Even if he's real, I don't believe that he's going to do it. Not that he doesn't have the power to do it, but I don't believe it. So therefore, you spend your life doing sins. You don't do any mitzvahs at all. And you suddenly find out that God was right. In other words, when the Mashiach comes, you will suddenly see a shocking event that what God was saying to you is true. How will you feel? You wouldn't feel guilty? No. You're an adult. You're not a child. You don't have to feel guilty. You didn't do anything wrong. What did you do? You didn't do something right. It's a whole different feeling, and you will lose out. That's what you should feel on Yom Kippur. That's what you should do. You should do a lot of thinking. Can you trust God and saying what he's saying? Well, God revealed himself. He revealed an aspect of himself on Har Sinai. He actually revealed himself and asked himself so that the people of Israel, the Jewish people, should know God is not joking. He's not fooling around. That for the Torah that he gave you, if you keep that Torah, if you are loyal to him, if you develop a relationship, if this should be your main thing that you're concerned with, God will reward you with what? With a permanent relationship with him, which means eternity in an ecstatic form. And that means you'll be doing something right. And that should be your attitude, Yom Kippur. Not that you did anything wrong. You're an adult. You had free will. You had the right to choose what you wanted to do. But what did you do? What did you do? You did something where you didn't do something right. How did you do something wrong? Not by damaging yourself, because you didn't avail yourself of the incredible opportunity that God gave you. I believe that's the feeling you have to have for Yom Kippur. Any other feeling it's immature. It's a child begging for forgiveness so that his parent doesn't slap him. You are not going to be slapped if you don't do the mitzvahs. That's not going to happen to you. God's not going to slap you. God's going to annihilate you. Why? Because you annihilated yourself. God gave you an opportunity to exist forever. And you said, no, I'm not interested. I don't believe you. And therefore, you will be annihilated. It's only because God is merciful to you. And he gives you pain to take away the sins that you do. It's the pain that God gives you. It's the yisurin that you experience. That is the mechanism which God forgives you. According to the attribute of justice, God does not give pain. God gives annihilation out of existence. God gives only pain as a result of the attribute of mercy. So every time you're in pain and so on and so forth, you ought to be happy. God is saving you. What are you complaining about? And that's what a Jew is. A Jew realizes that if I have pain, if I have yisurin, but Tochen says whatever God does is for the best. God is actually saving you. And if you understand that and you realize this is true, you will therefore do the right thing. God is saving you through suffering, okay, in whatever he gives you, but he is saving you because he's doing good for you. Whatever God does is for the best. That in the pain that you have and the suffering that you feel, yeah, it hurts, that's true. When you put your underwear into a washing machine, and you can have a conversation with your underwear while it's in the machine, spinning around and around. And you say to your underwear, how do you feel about spinning in a washing machine? Your underwear, if it could talk to you, would say, I feel pain. It hurts. I'm being thrown up and down and up and down. But fundamentally, what's happening? That being thrown up and down cleans the underwear. It cleans your clothes. So therefore, all the pain that it's suffering is to clean the clothes. So that in the end of time, you will be clean. You will be eternal. That's what will happen. So we shouldn't mistake the idea of what God is doing to us. And the greatness of Avraham Avinu was that he realized that. You know what? He was in such a level of Yerushalayim. It's very difficult to comprehend who Avraham Avinu was. It's very difficult to comprehend who Moshe Rabbeinu was. that Moshe Rabbeinu did not want God to make him the patriarch of Israel. He didn't want it. He wanted to save the people who he now served. Because he knew that deep down, that's what God wanted. God, through the attribute of mercy, wants to save his people. So God would rather bury the messianic light, the light of absolute truth, into what? Into 49 previous gates, so that he could bring down the messianic light to earth, so that you never have to go back up to heaven to get it. And he can hide it in the broken tablets, and then finally reveal it to the Jewish people. God is doing all of that, and God is giving you a Yom Kippur. He's giving you a Yom Kippur to show you that you have a future. You think you don't have a future. You have a future. You have a magnificent and glorious future. You just have to hold out. You have to be B'teach, that God knows what he's doing. Baruch Dayan Emes. Blessed be God, who is the true judge. And whatever he gives you, which is pain, is to save you in the end. And that should be your attitude of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur saves us from the hate of the egel, the sin of the golden calf. It saves us and says to us, you have a future. Even though I put the 50th gate, the messianic light, into a darkness, I will not keep it there forever. I will one day reveal it to you when you suddenly go through all the things that I want you to go through. I will save you. Even with your sinas chinam, with everything you do, I will still save you. And that's what Yom Kippur is about. It's an opportunity, an incredible opportunity. But to take advantage of Yom Kippur, you have to understand what God is doing. That when God is causing you pain, he's not coming after you. He's trying to clean you like a washing machine. And that's basically what it's about. So this is the attitude that you have to have for Yom Kippur. Any questions?
Shimon, thank you so much. Very nice here. Just Yitzchak's question with the Sarla Azazel. I didn't fully understand. You give the Sarla Azazel so
well, I don't want to talk about the Sarla Azazel. I don't want to interfere. I'll speak to you privately.
Okay, no problem. Sure.
Okay, thank you for appearing. And this is my Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's a completely different share. You know, I try to inform you what is really going on with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's not so easy. It's not so simple like everyone is making. It's much deeper in terms of what's going on, and so on. And the next year I'm going to give will be the share on Sukkot. I'm going to give a share on the Pneumius, the inner spirituality of Sukkot, because most people don't understand what a Sukkah is and what's the Abba Mina. What's going on? What are we doing? What is Shmini Atzeres? What's going on? And we will talk about that. And then after that, I will return to the shiur I'm giving on why God destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and what does it mean that we are now in the Yemos HaMashiach, the days of Mashiach. Okay, thank you for calling, and that's it.
Thank you. It's over.
Excuse me, Shimon, can I be mechutzit?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I give you.
Okay, no, maybe you could just wish the Olam here, the boys on the share, and everybody in Klal Yisrael for the new year, a nice warm bracha, if I may ask.
I gave it already.
Oh.
I gave that bracha already.
During the share.
Yeah, in the middle of the share, I gave that bracha that this year should be the Geula. We should finally see the release of the 50th gate from out of the Kabbalah. The 50th gate is in the prison of the Kabbalah, and it should be released from that prison.
Amen.
And that's the bracha that I gave you, okay?
Amen. Yeah, thank you, Shimon. To everybody.
Okay, take care.